this module, we'll discuss trauma, what it is, its causes, and why it's important, and what we can do to support the students who have experienced or are experiencing trauma in their life. To many, the word trauma conjures up thoughts of people who have experienced the most heinous acts, including violence, destruction, and death. While these certainly are examples of the kind of events that might create trauma, our definition must be much broader to account for a full range of potentially trauma-inducing events. Trauma is an event that is witnessed or experienced and seen as a threat of death, serious injury, sexual violation, or other physical or emotional harms. It is important to note that the event in question may be real or perceived by that individual. That is, the individual's unique experience and perception of the event are what determine the degree to which it is traumatic. Sometimes, adults may tend to minimize or wave off student worries or fears that they see as unwarranted. But it is important to realize that even what we may view as irrational fears can cause very real trauma. The students we see on a daily basis have often experienced unspeakable things in their lives that we could not even imagine. While these events may have been in the past, trauma can follow students all through their schooling and life. Thus, it's important that we be aware of the signs of trauma so that we can ensure the correct care is provided. While it may seem unnecessary to answer this question, let's discuss why we should care about trauma. A logical response to this question is, as educators, we are responsible for all of the students in our charge. And the reality is that trauma has been linked to chronic health problems, such as heart disease, liver disease, and early death, as well as mental, emotional, and behavior disorders. Simply put, without intervention, students suffering trauma are far less likely to be successful in school or in life. Trauma is something that all educators deal with, often on a daily basis. Let's hear more from some JCPS teachers.
Like when we start our live sessions, we do an activity. So the activity that we'll do is like 4 corners to where, I'll have one student put up a number and the other, students, put up their numbers as well. And so this one in particular student, I know that, by doing this activity, he was already in a good mood. But when we went on ahead and went to the lesson, he must have got distracted and kind of veered off and attention went somewhere else. Forgot that his microphone was on and his grandmother came in, kind of went off on him. And it was just like, I didn't hear any more from him during that whole session. So it was like, and he's one on a regular day, he participates. And it was like, hey, you still there, big guy? Like, I can't do nothing, but.
But I struggle more with the absolute shutdown, nothing. Like, I'm not moving, I'm not answering, I'm not anything. I'm just going to sit here and do nothing and look at you like you didn't speak to me. That's the part that's harder for me. I can deal with the words, like I can work through the words. It's the no words that are harder.
The complaining has been just over the top. And I understand, and I get it. But I can't see you. I can't hear you. My video is not working. And there's only so much you can do, looking at 16, 17, 18 different little windows, hoping that they're all the same. And when one fixes it, one doesn't get working. And when I try to get this one work, this one goes by. And then all of a sudden it's been 45 minutes and I gotta go. And the complaining is there. It's different, but it still gets me. Even though I'm not in a classroom, I'm not looking at the kids other than through a screen. But the complaining it's rough.
NTI is challenging in a number of ways, and trauma is no exception. It's hard enough to get an accurate read on a student in a classroom filled with students, but to do so in a virtual classroom is even tougher. In this section, we'll discuss some simple things that we can do as adults to help deal with trauma. Perhaps the most important thing when considering school-wide efforts to support students with trauma is to remember that we as adults have a role. We must continue to talk about trauma and discuss the strategies and tactics that we must all undertake to effectively work with these students. It's worth noting that these strategies discussed herein are not necessarily effective only for students with trauma. In fact, these strategies must be considered best practice for the majority of students. But when we talk about students with trauma, these strategies become essential, especially when implemented with intentionality. There are 4 big ideas for us to consider, each of which involves a set of practices. The first big idea concerns developing a sense of safety for all students. We must consider how we can create environments in which students feel safe from mental and physical harm. In fact, a sense of safety is the belief that your needs and the needs of those that you care about will be met. It is the belief that you will be protected from harm and those around you will be safe. Of course, there are no guarantees in life, but in the confines of an NTI classroom, this is something that we do have quite a bit of control over. Here are some basic strategies that we can employ to support students' sense of safety. First, we must create an environment that encourages students to talk with one another about safety concerns. The teacher's ability to make students feel safe will rely on the ability to encourage students to be honest and to relate to one another in a caring and non-judgmental manner. In a similar vein, we should encourage students to talk with friends and family members on the phone. Teachers can also help by encouraging students to engage with one another outside of class. In the virtual environment, this might be as simple as encouraging students to connect on social media or to share interests by phone. For younger students, teachers can encourage similar behaviors, but realize that this likely will involve contacting parents to assist in facilitating this contact. Because the students in our NTI lessons are already at home, it may be effective to recommend some simple, fun, and free activities at home. Such recommendations can be encouraged by teachers, and follow-up questions about the activity can make a great start for the next day's lesson. Starting each class with positive affirmations would begin filling up the empty cups of our students. Finally, consistency is an extremely important component of a safe classroom. Remember, the lives of these students are often chaotic and unpredictable. The more we can provide them with a predictable and structured schedule, the more that they can relax and not worry about what might happen next. The second big idea involves being connected with students. Connectedness refers to having relationships with others who can understand and support you. And while this is something that we must create for all students, it is especially important for students dealing with trauma. Here are some things that we can do to support connectedness. We must keep in mind that when the virtual class begins, many of the students that you see in a group of faces are sitting at home alone. This fact increases the importance of greeting students by name and providing eye contact. Remember to look into your camera when talking to students so that it feels as if you're talking directly to them. When you look at your screen, you're not necessarily making eye contact. While engaged in virtual learning, it is more difficult to casually walk by and have an interaction with students like you can in a classroom. We'll have to be much more purposeful and looking for ways to have even small engagements. One simple strategy is to ask specific students about what they're doing right at that moment, or what they've been doing just before logging on. While this might seem benign to us, this little bit of genuine attention can mean the world to a student suffering trauma. In fact, even private messages can be useful to let students know that you're thinking about them and keep them engaged. Virtual learning presents many challenges, especially when we are not fluent and comfortable with the platform. Sometimes this uncertainty prevents us from using some of the tools available to us to make virtual learning more engaging. There are many ways to put students into smaller groups and engage them in group projects and activities, both within the virtual learning platform or linking them by phone. These can include icebreakers and other activities such as puzzles or scavenger hunts that are meant to engage students. But positive feedback should be for more than just getting the right answer or remaining on task. It's important to praise students publicly for their participation and contributions to the group. For students suffering from trauma, this praise for their contributions helps to establish a connectedness that is critical to making them feel comfortable. Finally, while we have students looking at us on their computer screens, it is a great opportunity to speak directly to them about the importance of being connected to others. Remind them that they share a common bond by being in this class, and that their connectedness to one another is an important piece of being in a community. The more we can make this clear to students, the more we can encourage them to relate to one another in a more connected manner. The third big idea related to trauma is the concept of hope. Hope is the expectation that everything will work out and the feeling that things will be all right. A big part of social emotional learning, or what we call SEL, involves helping students to understand that they are a part of a community and that mental health is an important aspect of humanity that we all should consider. As a part of this focus, it is important to encourage students to find a person that they believe they can trust. A good assignment for SEL is to have students interview a person that they trust and to ask them how they stay hopeful in troubled times. Reporting this back to the class may also be a useful exercise to keep everyone engaged in this content. Hope is buoyed by examples and stories of how people stay resilient and bounce back from trauma and tragedy. We can support this by teaching students about difficult periods in history and describing how people came together to overcome hardship. We don't want to minimize tragedy. Rather, we want to show that even in the worst of times, things can and will get better. Not all of our examples of resilience are a part of our public history. We also have our own more local and even personal stories from our past that we can share. These stories may be even more impactful when they are related firsthand and involve our own feelings. Lethargy and isolation are both symptoms of and an accelerator for depression and hopelessness. It's helpful if we encourage students to get out of the house and move around in daylight, to exercise in some way, and to find ways to engage with others if at all possible. Part of dealing with trauma is finding ways to feel hope by re-engaging with the world. The concept of positive feedback was previously discussed and will come up again because it is such a powerful yet simple strategy. Again here, simple positive affirmations provided to students on a regular basis accumulate and provide much needed hope for students who have learned to be pessimistic about their own future. As with any good instruction, it's critical to teach students a variety of ways in which something may be accomplished. In terms of students finding hope, we must provide them with a full range of possibilities, including spirituality, meditation, exercise, and a variety of other activities. It's not necessary to delve deeply into any of these. We don't need to discuss a range of religions. Rather, we just need to discuss how different people find different ways to deal with stress and depression. While we take the lead in our virtual classes and we provide our students with content, strategies, and feedback, we also need to engage the students by giving them chances to contribute, even if in a minor way. Often, students with trauma are not eager to speak, and we don't want to force that. But we do want to give students opportunities to at least think about the things that bring them hope. Even if they don't respond aloud, the prompt to think about hope encourages students to consider this on their own. The fourth and final big idea has to do with relationships. Relationships and routines should lead the way. These four key ideas are important. First, building positive relationships with students takes priority over everything. Second, we must maintain an attitude of inclusivity, such that the message is all students are accepted. Third, have a set routine for the time that you work together, but be flexible. And fourth, by falling back on relationships and routines, but allowing flexibility when needed, remind students that the caring adults in their lives can and will take care of them when times are tough. Here are some strategies for supporting students. Before beginning class, it's a good idea to find a way to engage the students with some type of check-in activity. Ideally, this would involve a conversation, but in virtual learning, we can also consider having students respond with a thumbs up on the screen, a message in the chat, or raising a hand to speak to the group. Again, we don't want to force students to be put on the spot if they're not comfortable, but we do want to encourage them to participate actively and receive acknowledgement. A great strategy for drawing students out is to ask simple, open-ended questions. It's easy to shrug or say, "I don't know," when asked an objective question. But questions that ask, "What do you think?" or "What would you do?" provide the students with the opportunity to answer without the fear of being wrong or criticized. Again, the concept of positive feedback is important. We must be genuine in our feedback and let students know that we value their presence and input as well as their work. Virtual learning is a valuable tool, especially during times when we can't safely meet together. But as we've said, it does present some challenges for us in terms of creating natural relationships with students. For this reason, it is important to find ways to create relationships. A good rule of thumb is to send an email or a postcard or to call individual students on a weekly basis. Emails are quick and easy, while postcards are more tangible but slow. You might want to think about the students from whom a personal connection might be most appreciated and make a short list for personal phone calls. Feelings charts can be helpful in getting students to self-identify their feelings and become more self-aware. These charts can be easily distributed on a regular basis throughout each week to keep students in tune with their feelings. As a final thought, remember that we've tied much of the support strategies back to SEL. Some of the coping strategies and other practices associated with SEL are also good ideas to incorporate into your interactions with all students. When thinking about coping strategies that we can use when we're overwhelmed, it's important to think about naming and claiming emotions that we feel. Using emotional vocabulary and working to get away from the words students typically use, like mad, sad, happy, etc. This helps students better understand big feelings they're experiencing. Other coping strategies could include taking 5, showing students even virtually it's okay to stop and take a breath when they're overwhelmed or upset. We can model this with techniques that involve deep breathing and grounding. It is important that as educators we model and create psychological safe spaces where students can learn to cope with all they're experiencing. Some virtual coping strategies include journaling, mindful activities, and social support. Keeping these 4 ideas in mind provide you with a full range of possible strategies to help students with trauma, and in fact, all of your students. Now that we've talked about general support, we still need to consider strategies for responding to students' misbehaviors and emotional difficulties in a trauma-sensitive manner. Remember, the trauma that these students have experienced can perpetuate a mistrust of adults, a lack of hope, and a disconnect from any human relationships. Given these factors, we would expect that some misbehaviors could manifest. The following are some things to keep in mind when responding to these students' behaviors. While we don't want to ignore these students or their misbehaviors, we also do not want to crowd, challenge, provoke, or in any way shame them. Rather, we must provide space enough for the student to not feel threatened. Further, we should avoid talking to or lecturing and instead encourage these students to express their feelings and concerns and to find their own calm. It may be helpful to think about approaching these students with a trauma lens. This means we ask, "What has happened to you?" as opposed to "What is wrong with you?" Throughout the day, we may need to provide students with opportunities to express their feelings. As we've discussed, there are several options for teachers to use as a way of engaging students with one another and as both an icebreaker and a part of the lesson. Now that you've been exposed to the big idea with regard to trauma, let's look at some situations where trauma plays a role and consider how the adults handle it. The teacher in this first scenario has just recently gotten to know the class lists and is working to get to know the students in any way possible. The teacher has made phone calls home, has scheduled Google Meets, and has generally attempted to contact every student in some way. After viewing this, what areas of concern is the student struggling with? How can you support and what strategies could be provided to help deal with the anxiety being experienced?
For Black people, when you call the cops, it's a threat. It could be another problem. So that's what gets on my nerves.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like how many times does someone have to get shot and killed for absolutely nothing until it's over, Like it feels like it's just not going to end. So how many times does somebody need to die before we realize that something's wrong and people need to change their ways? Like, it's ridiculous. And I cannot see how hundreds of years later this is still a problem. Right. How people are still that ignorant and judgmental just because someone's skin color is different. That's so ridiculous to me.
Right, exactly. Like, hopping off that, the fact that someone the fact that multiple people have to die and nothing is still done. The
I don't mean to
fact
cut you
that
off, but
no-
going off what AJ said about like how much people and I like have to die before we realize, my thing is I don't really know the answer to that question because they're not really doing anything to help. The president's not doing anything to help. The government's not doing anything to help.
Right.
Nobody doing anything to help. Even the protests, you know, that was a movement. You know, it was something close to a revolution. You know, we got the whole world in that. You know, Black Lives Matter, and he still does nothing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's a big problem as well. Is that I don't know the answer to that question of how much more people have to die before we do something because no one's trying to do anything that represent this country.
Yeah.
It seems pretty clear that this student is struggling with trauma and perhaps depression. Connectedness and hope seem like an important consideration for support with this student. Let's watch how a teacher might handle this.
Hey Layla, how's it going?
It's okay, I guess.
All right, well, I like to touch bases with my students to check in and see. I know it's a really hard time for everything going on right now, but know and believe me that it's not always going to be like this. And just know that you have people here to support you. Is there anything that you want to talk about?
No, I just really feel like I don't care that much about school anymore.
So I hear you saying you don't care about school. Is there anybody in your life that supports you?
Well, yeah, my family.
So what does your family do that helps you, that supports you through these times?
Well, they usually talk it out with me and make me feel more comfortable.
So what can I do that will help you stay motivated?
I guess you can do that as well if you want.
All right, that's too easy. I can definitely do that. And I want you to know that I'm here anytime that you need me. You can message me at any time and know that we support you and that we care for you.
Thank you.
All right, and also know that your classmates support you too, and they would love to hear your voice.
Okay.
All right, take care.
Let's look at another one and consider some of the same questions. This teacher's students are just returning to school after a long layoff. There is a student in the class who is noticeably nervous about the changes related to social distancing, frequent hand washing, and wearing face masks. The student has a great deal of anxiety about catching the virus. Watch how this plays out.
Okay, so what's the next steps to divide these problems?
Can I catch the virus from the food in the store?
No, Liv, you're safe in the supermarket. But let's get back on track. What are the next steps to this problem?
What if my mask has a virus inside it when I put it on?
After viewing this, how can you support this student? What strategies could you use to help the student deal with the anxiety being experienced? This student is obviously unnerved by the virus and is unable to concentrate. In such cases, the teacher needs to take time away from instruction to specifically reassure the student and all other students who are listening in that they are safe as long as they follow the procedures. Of course, we can't promise anything, but we can calmly reassure all that a lot of people who care about them have come up with procedures because they believe that it is the safest thing to do. Let's look at how the teacher might handle this.
Let's talk a little bit more about the new procedures. Liv, why do you think it is that we have to be 6 feet apart? And why do you think we have to wear masks?
Because of COVID?
Yes, of course. That's correct. However, why do you think we have to do those two things?
To be safe?
Yes, that's correct. We have to make sure that we wash our hands and we will most likely not get the virus and that we'll be in good shape. So there's nothing to really worry about as long as we follow those two things.
But can't we still get it?
We are more likely to not get it as long as we make sure that we wash our hands, wear our mask, and we're 6 feet apart. I wouldn't tell you to do something that would put you in harm's way, and nor would your parents.
Okay.
When we start doing our science research, we are going to go into more detail of this, and you can share what you have learned.
Here's one final vignette. Again, think about basic questions we've been asking as you consider this scenario. This teacher is setting up groups, and a student in the virtual classroom refused to put the camera on himself despite repeated requests. Watch how this plays out.
Okay, that's a great thought, Caitlin. Hey, Alan, what do you think about this?
I don't know.
Alan, can you please sit in front of your camera and so we can see you? Come on, Alan. I would love to see your smiling face today.
I know, but I just hate this stupid camera and this stupid class. Like, I just want to sleep.
The student certainly has the signs of trauma and mental health risks. Let's look how a teacher might handle this.
Okay, all right, I understand. I hear you. All right, so the rest of the class, how about you guys go ahead and leave and finish your work? And Alan, me and you, how about me and you have a one-on-one conference together, okay?
All right.
Hey, Alan, how are you feeling? You seem like you're kind of down.
I just don't feel like doing all this school stuff, and I really don't want to be on camera right now. I'm just so tired.
Okay, I hear you. You don't want to be on camera. You're tired of school. I get it. So how about this? How about your camera is on the top of your head? That way I can see you to make sure that you're okay, and I won't worry about you.
I mean, that's fine.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, for now, I guess. Like I said, I really don't feel like doing this right now. I'm so tired. I barely got any sleep, and I just want to go back to sleep. That's it.
You know, I understand. I get it. We're all tired, but Alan, just know that you're super special here, and I see potential in you, and I need to make sure that all my students are safe, and that's my job here, to make sure that you're okay. So I'm quite sure we can come to some type of solution and some compromise. All right.
All right.
We'll try to get some rest. Okay.
Gotcha.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Sometimes it's important to consider compromises that are necessary to keep students with trauma with us. Holding to a hard line with these students can exacerbate their feelings of helplessness.